El pueblo unido jamás será vencido. El pueblo
Chased by the deep state, fighting for independence, thinking about revolution, looking for alternative solutions. The enemies of the deep state will tell you what others even don't dare to think. Manuel Ochsenreiter and Mateusz Piskorski.
Hello. Welcome to the next edition of the podcast, DieGutenMenschen, Public Enemies of the Deep State, with Manuel Ochsenreiter. That is me. I'm editor-in-chief of the German news magazine Zuerst, and Mateusz Piskorski. Hello, Mateusz.
Hello, from the bunker, anti-coronavirus bunker in Poland.
Yes, I'm here also in the bunker in Africa, and the connection is still working out. I think we can do this corona jokes until the end of the year. I have a feeling in the meantime.
Well, at least, yes, because you remember that we have discussed different pandemics in the world history, and it came out that several of them lasted for 3-4 years. So who knows?
And I have to say, since last podcast, Maduro is still here and hiding, so nothing can happen.
Yes, that is the good news. But all our listeners know about it, so I guess we should answer to some questions posed by the listeners lately.
Absolutely, yes. So what we were asked was in always in the beginning of the podcast, we have this very masculine voice explaining what we are doing, and the voice is saying, among other things, thinking about revolution. And one of our listeners was asking what kind of revolution you are thinking about. Mateusz, what revolutions are you thinking about the whole day?
Well, we are all the time thinking about revolution in geopolitics, in politics, in economics, so all kinds of revolution, I guess, yes. But the real revolutions, not the color revolutions, which we analyze, of course, as well. So one of our topics are revolutions in general, as such. Well, there's a big difference, you agree with me, between an artificial revolution, which is inspired from abroad, and which is the case lately in several countries, for instance, Ukraine, and the so-called Arab Spring, by the way, and real revolutionary changes which are taking place in geopolitics, in internal politics as well, which we are trying to somehow perhaps not predict, but to analyze, yes, what is going on from this point of view. We might talk several podcasts, we might devote several podcasts to analyze the notion of revolution as such in political science, in history, in philosophy, but anyway, I think, at least for me, revolution means that we have a deep change in political order on a given area, in the political order, in the social order, in economic order. So I think it's very general notion. What do you think about it?
Yes, and I think one can say to define what is understood by revolution. I mean we could say a revolution is taking place. I wouldn't say now it's necessary, but it's taking place in the moment when there are no evolutionary opportunities anymore to change a certain situation. May it be, as you mentioned, in geopolitics, social politics, in politics, and I think that such kind of revolutions are always including all these fields. It's very rarely that there is a revolution taking place in social politics and it doesn't automatically change also the geopolitical stance of a society. So I think we could say this, that at the moment when there is no evolutionary opportunity anymore, when the path or the opportunities of traditional politics is at its end, because there is no other path anymore, then a revolutionary change is taking place, And the necessity for this revolutionary change is simply it's coming by the situation itself. So I think revolutions can rarely be planned at a table with a time plan. And whenever we had this, and you were mentioning the color revolutions of the last decades, especially inspired by George Soros and his Open Society foundations, and of course the United States of America, which also were financing and supporting those so-called revolutions. But what we can say, you mentioned Ukraine. If we look to Ukraine, then we can say this was not a real revolution. I think whatever brought a Ukrainian on the Maidan in 2013, 2014, whatever he was protesting against and he wanted to get changed in a revolutionary way became worse until today. What do you think? I think it was the contrary of a revolution.
Yes, of course. But I try to avoid so-called monocausal explanations.
Yeah.
The revolutions, even those which are artificial, even those which are foreign inspired, yes, always have some ground inside. So if you let the social structures to be disrupted, if you cannot avoid deep economic crisis, if you cannot root the corruption, if you cannot fight all different plagues and crises within a country, there is a huge probability that someone will use that. Someone will use your weakness. That was, I don't know if you'll agree with me, but I think that this worked, for instance, for Syria, yes? I mean, there were some advisors from World Bank, from International Monetary Fund, all those liberals who tried to advise the Syrian government anti-social reforms, yes?
Yes.
Then they have created a ground for someone from abroad, we know who was that, who wanted to destabilize the system, and as an effect they caused a civil war, of course, yes, or a proxy war using mercenaries from different countries. So revolutions have different causes, yes, it's not just we can explain any kind, even those artificial revolutions, by one cause. Because, for instance, if you would come to, I don't know, let's say, a very stabilized and, let's say, well-founded system as, for instance, the Chinese People's Republic, yes, with the handbook of Gene Sharp, promoted by George Soros, it wouldn't work out there, yes?
We had the attempt in the city of Hong Kong.
In Hong Kong, of course, yes.
What failed, and there we know that the handbooks of Gene Sharp were already distributed many years ago in Chinese language, by the way. So, but of course, you're right. And a stabilized system will not fall for revolution. So this is why I mentioned especially Ukraine, where the people had, of course, a lot of reason to be angry with the system, to be angry with corruption, to be angry with any kind of mistakes. And what they thought what was a revolution was in reality something which was even more stabilizing the system of corruption, but with, and that makes it now interesting, with the aesthetics of a revolution. We shouldn't forget that a revolution has also certain aesthetics, including today, especially also memes in social media, short movies. You remember the girl, I'm Ukrainian, which was, I think, shared tens of thousands or even more of times. So we have on the one side a system which is stabilizing itself by giving itself the aesthetics of a revolution. And I think that is maybe today one of the things we can observe mostly when it comes to so-called revolutions.
Yes, but it's very interesting that in 2014 we had a artificial revolution, foreign-inspired revolution in Kiev, but at the same year we had, I think, a real revolution in eastern regions of then Ukrainian territory, which means in Donbass. Yes.
Yes.
You have observed it as well, and I think that this is one of the very, very few cases in the modern world when there was a real, let's say, grassroots revolution coming from the people, coming from ordinary citizens.
And what makes exactly this example interesting is that the real revolution, which took place in the eastern provinces of Ukraine, in the mainly ethnical Russian settled regions of Ukraine, that there we don't see as much revolutionary aesthetics as we saw from Maidan. Did you notice that?
Yes, exactly. So this was, I know that we could discuss hours about their ideas, but this was to some extent, of course, with all the differences, cultural, historical, and so on, a kind of conservative revolution, which would be very, very close to your German heart.
Oh yes, we could also talk about that now for hours. But you're right, and I think it is a very good example that if we, and I think it is quite possible that we have to expect revolutionary changes also in Europe, especially now during the Corona crisis with the downfall of economy, especially European economy and of course also world economy, that we might witness revolutionary changes, real revolutionary changes, but without these overloaded aesthetics of a new Soros revolution, but that it might be on the one side a revolutionary change, but without the super big noise done by the propaganda apparatus. I want to tell you one example what makes it very interesting. We were just speaking about eastern Ukraine and the so-called Maidan revolution. If you noticed, the whole European mainstream media and established politics was totally cheering up the Kiev events, while condemning at the same time all the events in eastern Ukraine and of course in Crimea. I think there we also can speak about a real revolutionary change. What happened there with the referendum and the change of Crimea from Ukraine to Russia. But so while we have now, since I think, is it now more than a year? Yes, for sure, the Yellow Vests in France, we have the whole European liberal mainstream media, the corporate media, and the mainstream politics against the Yellow Vests. We have a lot of conspiracy theories transported by mainstream media against them. So we can take maybe as an indicator, whenever mainstream media is condemning and criticizing a revolutionary movement, there must be something good and true behind it. What do you think?
Yes, when mainstream criticizes a revolution or any kind of unrest, then it must be a real, authentic revolution.
Because so, just one sentence. If I would be German corporate mainstream journalist, maybe even working for state media, there would be nothing I would be more afraid of, also because of my personal financial future, than of a real change and a real revolution.
Definitely, yes. I agree. So what do you think about the prospects of any kind of revolution in the coming months?
Well,
or years?
I think we can witness now in the population, and I think what is also important when it comes to revolutionary movements is that it is that we left the times when a revolution was a pure thing of class-related thinking. So if that is what I notice, and I'm sure you notice it as well, that we have now a huge middle class and upper middle class people in Europe, in any European country, in every European country, which are about to lose a lot during the Corona crisis and the draconic world financial reactions on it. I am pretty much sure that we have there a rise of anti-system thinking. Because what is one of the conditions for a revolution is, of course, that the people participating in the revolution are seeing the system as something which you cannot change and not reform, but which has to be replaced by another system. And I think that we witness right now in Europe a growing number of people who think that the recent system failed and should be replaced by another system, even maybe not knowing exactly by which system or by what kind of system, but that there is a deep understanding that the recent system failed, what is now especially shown during the Corona crisis.
Yes, exactly. I think we are just at the beginning of a lengthy process, social process, which will lead to different revolutionary movements. The question is, what are the main causes of the possible potential revolution in European countries? Of course, you have mentioned the coronavirus and all the things related to it. So I would elaborate on that, and I think that there are main three reasons which could ignite social unrest, potential leading to revolution. First one is of, let's say, psychological nature, which means that people, due to all those quarantine procedures and so on, are first deprived of their former social activities and contacts. Second, some of them are in these particular conditions starting to read, think and search for different alternative news, alternative interpretations of the world, which means that people have more time, physically they have more time to think about their life and to think about the existence of alternatives to the system we have now. Second group of reasons could be called, let's say, economical reasons, which are quite obvious. And this time I agree with you, of course, that the middle class, the so-called middle class, which was a kind of fetish in the liberal system, in liberal societies, is declining now, and they are being proletarized. Yeah. So they are joining the proletariat or joining the so-called precariat as another class without any stable income and so on. So this is the economic sphere, and we have the third group of reasons of social unrest, which means the state intervention, state surveillance of ordinary citizens. So people will fight for the ideas they have found in those times of quarantine, and the main of their ideas would be probably the idea of a state which, a liberal state which is bankrupt, and a liberal system which is bankrupt because of this coronavirus thing. Second, they will raise all those social unrest because of, joblessness, because of lack of financial perspectives. And third, they will also raise protests against the state, which is reminding more and more the anti-utopias of George Orwell or Aldous Huxley. So I think there will be main three reasons, yes, for potential revolutionary movements in the West.
I totally agree, and it is a little bit like this joke. You know the joke of the white settler in America and the Indian.
Yes.
The white man is collecting wood and always asking then the Indian chieftain, so how will be the winter this year? And the chieftain says it will be a very, very hard and cold winter. So the white man is collecting more wood, asking again, so how will be the winter? Said, the winter will be much harder and much colder than the last one. Mm-hmm. So at the end, the white man asks the chieftain, may I ask you, how do you know about how hard this winter will become? And the chieftain says, because the white man is collecting so much wood. So we have a little bit the same situation. One of the most important indicators which proves us right in this diagnosis and this forecast about what to come is that we witness in almost all European countries, on the one side, a big rise in all types of monitoring. I mean, we are discussing now in the context of the corona crisis, like tracking. All of the sudden, it is totally okay to speak about tracking softwares on your mobile phones. And we have on the other side as well a type of militarization of so-called inner security. I think there's a good example of the British police, which has now armored cars all of the sudden. So we see the system preparing itself for such a revolutionary situation, because there would be no other reason. Why do they need all these militarized machines if they don't expect something to come?
Of course, I think that, for instance, in Italy, there are some reports by the secret police, by all the security sector in that country. But I think the same goes for all other countries in Europe, that there's a potential threat of protests, of mass unrest there. And that's why they are now trying to build all the infrastructure to prevent all the revolutionary tendencies in their societies. So they are armoring the police. Of course, for the moment being, the European liberal state is still not ready to use the military, you have noticed. But officially they they are not intending to use the military, but they are, as you have noticed, it's quite a good idea and concept, they are trying to militarize the police force,
yes,
the ordinary police forces.
And look, if we just check, what is always called like the Constitution of the European Union, which is the Treaty of Lisbon, there we have very clearly passages in it which are dealing with public uprisings and with also the militarization, with permission to use military, for example, in the countries. I think even passages regarding the introduction of martial law. So the core of all this, the seed, is already planted there and gives for a revolutionary situation the system the opportunity to use all these things. And I think now we can slowly see a little bit these preparations, and we shouldn't forget something else. Europe was relatively peaceful since the end of World War II. Of course, we had the Yugoslav War, but the Yugoslav War was never seen in Central Europe as a concern of Central Europe. It was even, it seemed for us all in Central Europe as far away. And when we had first revolutionary situations with the breakdown of Soviet Union and the communist countries in Eastern Europe, I think the populations in Eastern Europe had a lot of hopes, and they had a lot of estimations about how things will become better if we, and also by joining the European Union. And I think what can be part of these explosions, you said in the beginning of our podcast that there are no monocausal explanations, and I totally agree to this. But imagine the disappointment which is still there in a lot of Eastern European countries, the disappointment by European Union, also by NATO membership. Also, this can or maybe even will be an ingredient in Eastern Europe for maybe for anti-system sentiments. What do you think?
Yes, and in this particular case, because usually, as you know, or perhaps with one exception of the Ukrainian Maidan, but usually all those revolutions, or even artificial revolutions, foreign-inspired revolutions, are not focused on foreign policy, yes? We can notice that they are dealing mostly with the internal affairs, with social policy, economic policy, and so on. In this particular case, I agree with you that one of the topics will be the bankruptcy of the Western system, also of the integration within the so-called Euro-Atlantic area, yes? This will be the difference. People will protest not only against the ineffectiveness of their own governments, of the liberal systems, of the national systems, but I think that for the moment being they perfectly understand also the lack of effectiveness of different structures. That is why you have noticed probably that the US and European Union are now warning against the so-called hybrid war, which they think is waged by China and Russia,
yes,
and even Iran against the West. Yes, they are talking about the destabilization of the so-called information area by all these three countries. Yes, so they are preparing for it because they completely understand that people could turn to the idea of close cooperation with countries other than the United States.
And this is why I strongly believe in if there is a revolutionary change, there will be something like a geopolitical automatism connected to this. In my opinion, it is impossible for any European entity or society, for example, to consider the system of the free market and the free trade and the globalist structure of the financial mechanisms as bad and harmful for European societies without automatically getting into a conflict with the United States and without automatically getting into a conflict with the Brussels administration. So this is why I strongly believe, even if those who will go on the street or will be in the social networks very active, if they have even know their own opinion about international politics or geopolitical context of what they are doing, it's not to avoid that it will have a geopolitical consequence. What do you think?
Yes, and it will be probably the first time when such issues will be on the agenda of revolutionary movements, because we haven't seen it before actually. So probably, yes, it would be one of the main topics. But another question, quite interesting as well, to ask is the question about the nature of revolutionary or protest movements in the world where everyone is under surveillance, where everyone is watched by all means by the governmental structures. So this would be perhaps another topic for another lengthy discussion, I guess. But anyway, we have already had some experience in different countries with the movements sometimes called as the digital dissidents.
Yeah.
So I guess that this will be the way to organize. I mean, the virtual world, the internet will be one of the places it could be organized.
Yes, and I think that we will see by these movements, which maybe we are not even now thinking about how they will look like, how they will be structured, who will be their leaders, that it comes also with a new organizational structure. It might come with new aesthetics. I think that everyone who believes that a revolution has to look like the French Revolution or like the Bolshevik Revolution in the Russian Empire in 1917, that these people are completely wrong. I think that it is not necessarily connected to masses on the streets, to burning barricades. I strongly believe that we will wonder and be puzzled how things can change with other methods.
Yes, definitely. I mean, of course, it's still worthy to read Lenin anyway. I would strongly advise it to everyone, because
the revolution cannot be done with white gloves.
Yes, because some of the thoughts of the Bolsheviks, for instance, could be quite inspiring or reinterpreted
Yes.
in the 21st century as well. But of course, the aesthetics and the principle on which all the movement and its leadership, its structure will be organized will be completely different. I think that you are right that all those protest and revolutionary movements will be trying to avoid any kind of ideological cliches. They will try to avoid identifying themselves with the right or the left, with the socialists or the conservatives. I guess that it will be a completely new quality now.
What will we do during the revolution? Will we still sit in our bunkers and do podcasts?
I hope that we are going to get out of the bunkers at that time, and that we'll be watching and analyzing the revolution in our podcast.
From outside the bunker, hopefully.
From outside, we'll be the witnesses.
Okay. So, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much to our audience for listening. We will come back soon with a new topic, but I think, Mateusz, that kind of topic with revolutionary change, especially in Europe, but also at other places in the world, will accompany us also in future.
I guess that we'll talk a lot about it. Also next time, talking about different kinds of revolutionary movements in the virtual space.
This program was presented to you by Manuel Ochsenreiter and Mateusz Piskorski, the hottest dissident who won't violate any time the global rules against racism, extremism, or any other bad isms.